The moment, Wilhelmina Jenkins rode into Seligman, Arizona on a stolen horse with a bullet graze across her shoulder and 3 men on her trail. She knew her luck had finally run out. The summer of 1882 had been unforgiving, and the desert heat shimmered off the dusty street as she slumped forward in the saddle, her vision blurring at the edges. Blood seeped through the makeshift bandage she had tied around her wound, and her throat felt like sandpaper. She needed water, shelter, and most of all, she needed to disappear before those men caught up with her. The small town looked like any other dot on the Arizona Territory map, with its weathered buildings and hitching posts, but it might be the last place she ever saw if she did not find help soon. She guided the horse toward what looked like a stable at the far end of town, trying to keep her head down and her face obscured by the brim of her hat. Every movement sent pain shooting through her shoulder, but she gritted her teeth and pushed forward, just a little further, just a few more yards. The stable doors were open, and she could see a tall figure inside, working with a length of rope. As she approached, the man looked up, and their eyes met for a brief moment before everything went dark and she felt herself falling. When Wilhelmina opened her eyes again, she was lying on something soft, and the harsh sunlight had been replaced by the gentle glow of lamplight. Her shoulder throbbed, but the pain was duller now, more manageable. She tried to sit up, but a firm hand pressed against her good shoulder, keeping her down. "Easy there," a deep voice said. "You have been through quite an ordeal. That bullet came mighty close to doing some serious damage." She turned her head and found herself looking into the bluest eyes she had ever seen. They belonged to a man in his mid-20s with sun-bronzed skin and dark brown hair that fell just past his collar. He had a strong jaw covered in a few days' worth of stubble, and there was a gentleness in his expression that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Name is Matthew Lancaster," he said, offering her a slight smile. "I run the stable and do some ranch work on the side. You fell off your horse right in front of my door about 2 hours ago. I got the bullet out and cleaned the wound, but you are going to need to take it easy for a few days." Wilhelmina's mind raced. 2 hours. Those men could be here any moment. She tried to sit up again, more forcefully this time. "I need to go. I cannot stay here." Matthew's hand remained steady on her shoulder. "You are not going anywhere in your condition. You have lost a lot of blood, and if you start moving around too much, that wound is going to open right back up." "You do not understand," she said, desperation creeping into her voice. "There are men coming. Dangerous men. If they find me here, they will kill me, and they will not think twice about killing anyone who helped me." Matthew studied her face for a long moment, and she could see him weighing his options. Finally, he nodded. "All right. Tell me what we are dealing with." She asked, surprised. "You showed up at my door needing help. I am not about to turn you over to men who would shoot a woman in the back." "So yes, now talk." Wilhelmina took a shaky breath. There was something about this man that made her want to trust him, even though every instinct she had developed over the past few years told her to trust no one. "I was working at a saloon in Flagstaff. One of the regular customers, a man named Vernon Pike, took a liking to me. He would not take no for an answer. When he tried to force himself on me one night, I fought back. He fell and hit his head on the corner of a table. I did not mean to kill him, but he was dead all the same." "Self-defense," Matthew said quietly. "That is not how his brothers saw it. Vernon Pike had 3 brothers, all of them meaner than rattlesnakes. They came after me, swearing revenge. I ran. I have been running for 3 weeks now. They caught up with me yesterday, shot at me while I was crossing through the mountains. I stole one of their horses and made it here, but they cannot be far behind." Matthew was silent for a moment, his jaw tightening. "The Pike brothers, I have heard of them. They are bounty hunters, though they are not particular about whether their targets are wanted dead or alive. They have a reputation for being brutal. Then you understand why I need to leave, Wilhelmina said. I will not bring that trouble down on you or this town. Where would you go? Matthew asked. You can barely sit up. You would not make it 5 miles before you passed out again, and then they would find you for sure. So what do you suggest? She asked, frustration and fear mixing in her voice. I suggest you stay right here and let me help you, Matthew said. This building has a hidden cellar. My grandfather built it during the Apache Wars for protection. No one knows about it except me. You can hide down there until you are strong enough to travel, and I will keep watch. If the Pike brothers show up, I will send them on their way. Why would you do this for me? Wilhelmina asked, searching his face. You do not know me. I could be lying about everything. Matthew reached out and gently brushed a strand of dark hair away from her face. The gesture was so tender that it made her throat tighten. I know what it is like to be hunted for something that was not your fault, and I know a decent person when I see one. You have got honest eyes, even if they are filled with fear right now. You are either very brave or very foolish, she whispered. Probably a bit of both, he admitted with a wry smile. But I made my decision the moment I caught you before you hit the ground. Now, do you think you can stand if I help you? We should get you down to that cellar before anyone comes looking. With Matthew's strong arm supporting her, Wilhelmina managed to get to her feet. The room spun for a moment, but she steadied herself against him, acutely aware of the warmth of his body and the solid strength of his frame. He guided her slowly across the room to a corner where several hay bales were stacked. He moved them aside with practiced efficiency, revealing a trapdoor underneath. Watch your step, he said as he opened it. The ladder is sturdy, but take it slow. I will be right behind you in case you slip. The cellar was larger than she expected, with enough headroom for her to stand upright once she reached the bottom. Matthew climbed down after her, carrying a lamp that cast flickering shadows on the earthen walls. There was a cot in one corner, along with some crates and barrels that looked like they held supplies. My grandfather was a cautious man, Matthew explained as he lit another lamp that hung from a beam. He kept this place stocked with food and water in case of emergencies. There is even some blankets and extra clothes in that trunk over there. It is not luxurious, but it is safe. It is perfect, Wilhelmina said, sinking down onto the cot. Thank you, Matthew. I do not know how I will ever repay you for this. You can start by telling me your name, he said, crouching down so they were at eye level. Wilhelmina Jenkins. Most people call me Willa. Well, Willa, you just focus on healing up. I will bring you some food and fresh water in a bit. If anyone comes around asking questions, you stay quiet down here. This floor is solid enough that voices do not carry. As Matthew turned to climb back up the ladder, Willa called out to him. Matthew, what if they do not believe you? What if they search the place? He looked back at her, and there was a steely determination in his eyes that had not been there before. Then they will have to go through me first, and I promise you, Willa, that is not going to be as easy as they might think. After he disappeared through the trapdoor, Willa lay back on the cot and stared up at the wooden beams above her. She had spent the last 3 weeks trusting no one, sleeping with one eye open, always ready to run at the first sign of danger. But something about Matthew Lancaster made her want to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had finally found a place where she could catch her breath. She touched her bandaged shoulder gingerly, noting the careful way he had wrapped it. He had gentle hands for a man who worked with horses and cattle. She must have dozed off because the next thing she knew, Matthew was climbing back down the ladder with a tray balanced carefully in one hand. The smell of hot stew made her stomach growl, reminding her that she had not eaten a proper meal in days. "Sorry it is not fancy," he said, setting the tray down beside her. "But it is hot and filling, which is what you need right now." Willa sat up slowly and accepted the bowl he offered. The stew was simple but delicious, thick with vegetables and chunks of beef. She ate slowly at first, then with more enthusiasm as her body reminded her how desperately it needed nourishment. "This is wonderful," she said between bites. "Did you make it yourself?" "I am a bachelor living alone," Matthew said with a slight grin. "If I had not learned to cook, I would have starved years ago, though I have to admit my repertoire is pretty limited. Stew, beans, biscuits, and the occasional steak, that is about the extent of it." "Still more than I can manage," Willa admitted. "I never had much opportunity to learn proper cooking. My mother died when I was young, and my father was not exactly the domestic type." "What happened to him?" Matthew asked, then quickly added, "If you do not mind me asking." Willa set down her spoon, her appetite suddenly diminished. "He was a gambler, a good one when he was sober. But whiskey was his true love, not me or my mother. He got himself shot in a poker game gone wrong when I was 15, left me with nothing but debts and a reputation as the daughter of a drunk and a cheat." "I am sorry," Matthew said quietly. "That must have been hard." "It taught me to rely on myself," Willa said with a shrug that she immediately regretted as pain flared in her shoulder. "Though I suppose I am not doing such a great job of that right now, seeing as I am hiding in a cellar while you risk your neck for me." "Everyone needs help sometimes," Matthew said. "That does not make you weak. It makes you human." They sat in comfortable silence for a while as Willa finished her meal. Matthew took the empty bowl and replaced it with a tin cup filled with cool water, which she drank gratefully. "I should let you rest," he said, starting to stand. "But I wanted to tell you that I rode out to the edge of town earlier, toward the direction you came from. Did not see any sign of riders yet, but I will keep watching." "Matthew," Willa said, catching his hand before he could move away. "Why are you doing this? Really? You said you know what it is like to be hunted, but you did not explain." He looked down at where her hand rested on his, and she saw something painful flash across his face. "About 3 years ago, I was working on a ranch up near Prescott. The foreman was a cruel man who enjoyed making the workers suffer, especially the Mexican hands. He would short their pay, work them until they dropped, and beat them if they complained. One day, I saw him whipping a boy who could not have been more than 12 years old. I stepped in, told him to stop. He came at me with the whip and we fought. I was not trying to kill him, but he hit his head when he fell, just like what happened with you and Vernon Pike." "Oh, Matthew," Willa breathed. "The ranch owner wanted to press charges, even though half the men there said it was self-defense. I had to run. Spent 6 months living rough, moving from town to town, always looking over my shoulder. Eventually, the ranch owner died of fever and his widow dropped the charges. She knew the truth about what kind of man her husband's foreman had been. But those 6 months taught me what it feels like to be hunted like an animal, to have no place to call home, to trust no one." "So you understand," Willa said softly. "I do. And I would not wish that feeling on anyone, especially not someone who was only defending themselves." He squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. "Get some rest, Willa. I will be up top if you need anything. Just stamp on the floor 3 times and I will come down." After he left, Willa lay back down and pulled the blanket up to her chin. The cellar was cool and quiet, a stark contrast to the hot, dusty trail she had been following for weeks. She closed her eyes and for the first time in a long time felt safe enough to truly sleep. She woke several times during the night, disoriented and reaching for the gun she usually kept under her pillow, only to remember where she was. Each time, she heard Matthew moving around above her, the familiar sounds of someone going about evening chores. The knowledge that he was there, keeping watch, allowed her to drift back to sleep. Morning came with Matthew climbing down the ladder carrying a plate of biscuits and bacon, along with a pot of coffee that smelled like heaven. Willa sat up, pleased to find that her shoulder hurt less and her head felt clearer. "You have got some color back in your cheeks," Matthew observed, setting the breakfast down. "That is a good sign." "I feel better," Willa admitted. "Your doctoring skills are apparently as good as your cooking." "I have had practice patching up horses and cattle," he said with a grin. "Figured the same principles would apply to stubborn women." Willa laughed, then winced as the movement pulled at her shoulder. "Did I just get compared to livestock?" "Only the finest livestock," Matthew assured her, his eyes twinkling. "Top quality." As she ate breakfast, Matthew checked her bandage, his touch gentle and professional. "It is healing well," he said. "No sign of infection, which is the main thing I was worried about. You should be able to move around more in a day or two, though you will need to keep that arm in a sling for at least a week." "Any sign of the Pike brothers?" Willa asked, dreading the answer. Matthew's expression grew serious. "3 men rode into town yesterday evening, about an hour after sunset. They matched the description you gave me. They went straight to the saloon and started asking questions about a dark-haired woman on a stolen horse." Willa's heart began to race. What did people tell them? "Nothing useful, because no one saw you come in except me. I had already hidden your horse in the back paddock and covered your tracks. As far as anyone in town knows, no mysterious women have shown up recently." "Did they search the stable?" "They tried. I met them at the door and told them I had not seen anyone matching that description. The leader, big fellow with a scar across his nose, he wanted to look around anyway. I stood my ground and said if they wanted to search private property, they would need to get the sheriff involved." "And?" Willa asked, holding her breath. "They backed off. I think they know they are operating outside the law, chasing you for a crime that was not really a crime. If they get the sheriff involved, there might be too many questions they cannot answer. They are staying at the saloon, but I heard them talking about moving on to check the next town over. They think you kept running." "Maybe I should have," Willa said quietly. "I have put you in danger by staying here." Matthew sat down on a crate across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Willa, I want you to listen to me. You did not put me in danger. I chose to help you, and I would make the same choice again. What those men are doing is wrong, and I am not going to stand by and let them hurt you." "You barely know me," she protested. "How can you be so sure I am worth this risk?" "Call it instinct," he said. "Or maybe just the fact that in the 2 days since you have been here, you have shown more grace and courage than most people manage in a lifetime. You are hurt and scared, but you are more worried about my safety than your own. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." Willa felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back. "I am not used to people being kind to me without wanting something in return." "Then you have been spending time with the wrong people," Matthew said firmly. "Not everyone in this world is looking to take advantage. Some of us actually believe in helping our fellow human beings." They spent the rest of the morning talking, with Matthew sitting on the crate and Willa propped up on the cot. She learned that he was 26 years old, had grown up on a ranch in Texas, and had come to Arizona 5 years ago looking for a fresh start after the incident with the foreman. He had saved every penny he could and had finally bought the stable last year, along with a small house on the edge of town. His dream was to eventually buy a ranch of his own, where he could raise horses and cattle. "What about you?" he asked. "What were you doing before you ended up working at that saloon?" Willa wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling exposed. "I have done a lot of things. Worked as a seamstress for a while, but my stitching was never quite good enough. Tried being a laundress, but the work was back-breaking and the pay was terrible. The saloon was supposed to be temporary, just until I saved enough money to maybe open a dress shop or something respectable. But then Vernon Pike happened, and all those plans went up in smoke. They do not have to, Matthew said. Once you are healed and the Pike brothers move on, you could still do those things. Maybe not here, but somewhere. Maybe, Willa said, though she did not sound convinced. Or maybe I am just fooling myself, thinking I could ever have a normal life. Everywhere I go, trouble seems to follow. Or maybe you have just had a string of bad luck, and things are about to turn around, Matthew countered. You cannot give up on yourself, Willa. She looked at him, really looked at him, taking in the earnest expression on his face and the genuine concern in his eyes. How do you stay so optimistic after everything you have been through? Because the alternative is giving up and becoming bitter, he said simply. And I have seen what that does to people. It hollows them out, turns them into something mean and small. I would rather believe that tomorrow might be better than today, even if I am wrong sometimes. Willa found herself smiling despite everything. You are an unusual man, Matthew Lancaster. I will take that as a compliment, he said, standing up and stretching. I need to get back to work before people start wondering why I am spending so much time in my stable, but I will come check on you at midday, bring you some lunch. Matthew, she called as he reached the ladder. Thank you. For everything. He looked back at her, and the smile he gave her made something warm bloom in her chest. You are welcome, Willa. Try to get some more rest. The next few days fell into a comfortable routine. Matthew would bring her meals and sit with her for as long as he could spare, and slowly, Willa began to heal. Not just physically, though her shoulder was definitely improving, but emotionally as well. For the first time since her father died, she felt like she had someone on her side, someone who genuinely cared about her well-being. She learned that Matthew had a dry sense of humor that often caught her off guard, making her laugh when she least expected it. He told her stories about the various horses he had trained, giving each one a distinct personality in his telling. There was Brutus, who was terrified of chickens, and Daisy, who had a habit of stealing hats off people's heads. He spoke about the animals with such affection that Willa found herself wishing she could meet them. On the fourth day, Matthew came down the ladder with news that made her heart sink. The Pike brothers are still in town. They have been going door to door, offering a reward for information about you. $200 to anyone who knows where you are. That is a lot of money, Willa said, fear creeping back into her voice. Someone will talk eventually. They always do. Not if they do not know anything, Matthew said. You need to trust me, Willa. This town is small, but the people here are decent. They are not going to turn over a woman to men like the Pike brothers, especially not for blood money. You have more faith in people than I do, Willa said. Maybe you just need to give them a chance to prove themselves, Matthew replied. That evening, as Matthew was preparing to leave after bringing her dinner, Willa caught his hand. Will you stay for a while? I know you have work to do, but I could use the company. Matthew settled back onto the crate without hesitation. Of course. What would you like to talk about? Tell me about your ranch, Willa said. The one you want to buy someday. What would it be like? Matthew's face lit up with enthusiasm. It would be in a valley, somewhere with good grass and a reliable water source. Not too far from town, but far enough to have some privacy. I would start with maybe 50 head of cattle and a dozen horses. Build a small house, just a few rooms at first, but solid and well made. Maybe add on to it as time goes by. It sounds wonderful, Willa said wistfully. I hope you get to have it someday. What about you? Matthew asked. If you could have anything, what would your life look like? Willa was quiet for a moment, thinking. I used to dream about having a dress shop, like I said. But lately, I have been thinking that what I really want is just a place where I belong. Somewhere I do not have to be afraid all the time. Somewhere I can put down roots and know that I will still be there tomorrow and the day after." "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Matthew said softly. "Everyone deserves to have a home." Their eyes met, and Willa felt something shift between them. It was subtle but unmistakable, a deepening of the connection they had been building over the past few days. She realized that she had started looking forward to Matthew's visits, not just because they broke up the monotony of hiding in the cellar, but because she genuinely enjoyed his company. She liked the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the rumble of his laugh, the gentle strength in his hands when he changed her bandages. "Willa," Matthew said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" He took a deep breath, as if gathering his courage. "These past few days, getting to know you, I have realized something. You are an extraordinary woman. You have been through things that would break most people, but you are still here, still fighting. And I find myself thinking about you even when I am not with you, wondering if you are comfortable, if you need anything, if you are scared." Willa's heart began to beat faster. "Matthew, I think about you too, more than I probably should." "The thing is," Matthew continued, "I know this is complicated. You are trying to stay alive, and I am just the man who happened to help you. But I cannot shake the feeling that maybe there is something real between us, something worth exploring once you are safe. And if I am never truly safe?" Willa asked, "What if the Pike brothers never give up? What if I have to keep running for the rest of my life?" Matthew reached out and cupped her face gently in his hand. "Then maybe you do not have to run alone." "I would only disappoint you eventually," Willa whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I have no money, no prospects, and 3 killers on my trail. You deserve better than that." Matthew smiled, and it was the most genuine, warm expression she had ever seen. "I will take that risk gladly." Before she could respond, before she could list all the reasons why he was making a mistake, Matthew leaned forward and kissed her. It was soft and tentative at first, a question more than a statement. But when Willa kissed him back, threading her good hand through his hair, it deepened into something that spoke of longing and hope and the promise of something beautiful. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Willa rested her forehead against his. "What are we doing?" she asked. "I am not entirely sure," Matthew admitted. "But it feels right, does it not?" "It does," Willa agreed. "It terrifies me, but it feels right." They stayed like that for a long moment, just breathing together before Matthew reluctantly pulled back. "I should go. But tomorrow, if you are feeling up to it, I think we need to have a serious conversation about what happens next." "What do you mean?" "I mean that hiding in a cellar is not a long-term solution. We need to figure out a way to deal with the Pike brothers, to make sure you are truly safe. And then we need to decide what we want to do about this thing between us." After he left, Willa touched her lips, still feeling the ghost of his kiss. She had not let herself think about the future in weeks, too focused on just surviving the present. But now, with Matthew's words echoing in her mind, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to actually have a life again, to be more than just a fugitive running from her past. The next morning, Matthew came down with breakfast and a determined expression. "I have been thinking all night, and I have an idea. It is risky, but I think it might be our best option." "I am listening," Willa said, setting down her coffee cup. "We need to get ahead of this. Right now, the Pike brothers control the narrative. They are telling everyone that you are a murderer who needs to be brought to justice. But what if we told the truth? What if we went to the sheriff and explained exactly what happened?" "Matthew, I already told you. No one is going to believe my word against the Pike brothers." "Maybe not on its own," Matthew agreed. "But what if we had evidence? I have been asking around very carefully, and it turns out Vernon Pike had a reputation in Flagstaff. He was known for being rough with women, for not taking no for an answer. There are probably other women who could testify to his character, even if they would not come forward before because they were scared. Even if that is true, how does that help me? He is still dead and I still killed him. Self-defense is not murder, Willa. Arizona territory has laws about that. If we can prove that Vernon attacked you first, that you were only protecting yourself, then you have not actually committed a crime. And if you have not committed a crime, the Pike brothers have no legal standing to hunt you down. Willa wanted to believe him, but years of disappointment had taught her to be cautious. And what if the sheriff does not see it that way? What if he arrests me and hands me over to them? The sheriff here is a man named Tom Rodriguez. He has a reputation for being fair and honest. I have known him for 5 years, and I have never seen him abuse his position or take bribes. If we explain the situation to him, I believe he will help us. You believe that, but you cannot know for certain. You are right, Matthew said. I cannot promise you that everything will work out perfectly, but I can promise you that I will be there with you every step of the way. If Sheriff Rodriguez tries to arrest you, I will testify on your behalf. I will find every person in Flagstaff who knows what kind of man Vernon Pike was. I will fight for you, Willa, because you deserve to be able to live your life without constantly looking over your shoulder. Tears welled up in Willa's eyes. Why are you so good to me? Because you deserve it, Matthew said simply, and because I am falling in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, both shocking and inevitable. Willa opened her mouth to respond, but Matthew held up a hand. You do not have to say anything back. I know this is fast, and I know you have a lot to deal with right now. I just wanted you to know where I stand, what you mean to me. Matthew, Willa said, her voice breaking. I am falling in love with you too. That is what makes this so hard. I do not want to drag you down with me if this all goes wrong. Then let us make sure it does not go wrong, Matthew said. Come with me to see Sheriff Rodriguez. Let us fight this the right way together. Willa took a deep breath, then nodded. All right. When? Today, if you are up for it. The sooner we deal with this, the sooner you can start living again. An hour later, with Willa's shoulder properly bandaged and her arm in a sling, Matthew helped her up the ladder and out of the cellar. The sunlight was almost blinding after days in the dimness below, and she had to squint against the brightness. Matthew kept his arm around her waist, supporting her as they made their way through the stable and toward the sheriff's office. They were halfway there when Willa heard a voice that made her blood run cold. Well, 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 if it is not the little murderer we have been looking for. She turned to see 3 men standing in the middle of the street. The one in the center was massive, easily 6.5 feet tall, with a jagged scar across his nose that gave him a perpetual sneer. The Pike brothers had found them. Matthew immediately stepped in front of Willa, shielding her with his body. You need to move along, he said, his voice calm but firm. You have got no business with this woman. The scarred man laughed, a sound like gravel grinding together. No business. She killed our brother. I would say that gives us plenty of business. Your brother attacked her, Matthew said. She was defending herself. That is not murder. That is for a judge to decide, one of the other brothers said. Hand her over and we will take her back to Flagstaff to stand trial. There is not going to be a trial, the scarred man said. There is going to be a rope and a tree and justice for Vernon. People had started to gather, drawn by the confrontation. Willa saw shopkeepers stepping out of their stores, women pausing with their shopping baskets, ranch hands stopping to watch. She felt exposed and vulnerable, but Matthew's solid presence in front of her gave her courage. That is not justice, Matthew said. That is revenge. And I am not going to let you take her. The scarred man's hand moved toward his gun, and time seemed to slow down. But before he could draw, a new voice cut through the tension. "That is enough." Sheriff Tom Rodriguez strode down the street, his hand resting casually on his own gun. He was a man in his 40s with graying hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "I heard there were some bounty hunters in town making threats. I was hoping they would have the good sense to move on, but apparently not." "This does not concern you, Sheriff," the scarred man said. "We are within our rights to pursue someone who killed our kin." "Actually, it concerns me very much," Rodriguez said, "because you are standing in the middle of my town, threatening violence against two of my citizens. Now, I am going to give you a choice. You can either holster your weapons and come to my office to discuss this like civilized men, or you can draw those guns and face the consequences. What is it going to be?" The Pike brothers exchanged glances, clearly not having expected resistance from the law. Finally, the scarred man nodded. "Fine, we will talk, but that woman better be there too, telling her side of the story." "She will be," Rodriguez said. "Now move, all of you." The walk to the sheriff's office was tense, with the Pike brothers walking ahead and Matthew and Willa following behind with Rodriguez. Once they were all inside, the sheriff closed the door and gestured for everyone to sit. "All right," he said, settling behind his desk. "Let us hear this from the beginning, and I want the truth, all of it, not whatever version serves your purposes." The scarred Pike brother, who identified himself as Luther, started to speak, but Rodriguez held up a hand. "I want to hear from the lady first." With Matthew's encouraging hand on her back, Willa told her story. She explained about working at the saloon, about Vernon Pike's unwanted advances, about the night he tried to force himself on her. She described the struggle, the way he had grabbed her and torn her dress, the terror she had felt. And she told how she had fought back, how he had fallen and hit his head. "I did not mean to kill him," she said, her voice shaking. "I just wanted him to stop. When I realized he was dead, I was going to go to the law, but then his brothers showed up and started threatening me. They said they would hang me without a trial, so I ran." "She is lying," Luther spat. "She lured Vernon into a back room and killed him for his money. We found his wallet empty." "Is that true?" Rodriguez asked Willa. "Did you take his money?" "No," Willa said firmly. "I did not touch his wallet. When I realized he was dead, I just ran. I did not think about anything except getting away." Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, studying each of them in turn. "Here is what I think happened. Vernon Pike got drunk and decided to take something that was not his to take. This lady defended herself, and unfortunately, Pike ended up dead. You boys did not want to accept that your brother was a rapist, so you convinced yourselves that she murdered him in cold blood. And now you have been hunting her across the territory, planning to execute her without a trial, which makes you just as much criminals as you claim she is." "You cannot prove any of that," Luther said. "Maybe not, but I can send a telegram to Flagstaff and ask some questions. I can talk to the other girls who worked at that saloon. I can look into Vernon Pike's history and see if there is a pattern of this kind of behavior. And I can also arrest all three of you for attempted kidnapping and making death threats. So here is what is going to happen. You are going to leave this town and this woman alone. If you do not, I will make sure there are wanted posters with your faces on them in every town from here to the Mexican border. Do we understand each other?" Luther looked like he wanted to argue, but one of his brothers put a hand on his arm. "Let it go, Luther. She is not worth hanging for." "Our brother deserves justice," Luther said through gritted teeth. "Your brother got what he deserved," Rodriguez said coldly. "He tried to violate a woman and he paid the price. Now get out of my office before I change my mind about arresting you." The Pike brothers stood, and for a moment, Willa thought Luther might go for his gun anyway. But finally, with a look of pure hatred directed at her, he turned and walked out, his brothers following. After they left, Rodriguez turned to Willa. "I want you to write down everything that happened, every detail you can remember. Then I am going to send some telegrams and do some investigating. If your story checks out, and I believe it will, I will make sure there is documentation that clears you of any wrongdoing. It might take a few weeks, but we will get this sorted out properly." "Thank you, Sheriff," Willa said, tears of relief streaming down her face. "Thank you so much." "Do not thank me yet," Rodriguez said. "Those Pike brothers might have agreed to leave, but men like that do not always keep their word. I would suggest you stay somewhere safe until we know for certain they have left the territory." "She can stay with me," Matthew said immediately. "I have a spare room in my house, and I can keep watch to make sure no one bothers her." Rodriguez raised an eyebrow but nodded. "That seems appropriate, given the circumstances. But I expect you to behave like a gentleman, Lancaster. This town does not need any more scandals." "Of course, Sheriff," Matthew said, though Willa could see a slight smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Over the next 2 weeks, Willa stayed at Matthew's house, sleeping in the small guest room while he took the larger bedroom down the hall. True to his word, he was a perfect gentleman, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. But the attraction between them continued to grow, fed by long evenings spent talking over dinner, by quiet mornings drinking coffee and watching the sunrise, by the simple comfort of being near each other. Sheriff Rodriguez worked tirelessly on her case, sending telegrams and gathering statements. It turned out that Willa had been right about Vernon Pike having a history. 3 other women in Flagstaff came forward with stories of his aggressive behavior, and one even testified that he had attacked her in a similar fashion a year earlier, though she had not pressed charges out of fear. Finally, 3 weeks after their confrontation in the sheriff's office, Rodriguez came to Matthew's house with a folder of documents. "It is official," he said, handing the papers to Willa. "You have been cleared of any criminal wrongdoing." The territorial judge reviewed the evidence and ruled that Vernon Pike's death was the result of self-defense. "You are free to go wherever you want, do whatever you want, without fear of prosecution." Willa stared at the papers, hardly able to believe what she was seeing. "I am really free." "You are really free," Rodriguez confirmed. "And as for the Pike brothers, they left the territory 2 days after our meeting. I sent word to law enforcement in neighboring territories about their threats against you, so if they try to come back, they will have to answer to more than just me." After the sheriff left, Willa turned to Matthew, who had been watching her with a gentle smile. "I cannot believe it is really over." "Believe it," Matthew said, pulling her into his arms. "You can start living your life again." "What if I want to start it here?" Willa asked, looking up at him. "What if I do not want to go anywhere?" Matthew's smile widened. "Then I would say that sounds like the best news I have heard in a long time." They stood there for a moment, holding each other, before Matthew pulled back slightly. "Willa, I know we have not known each other very long, but these past few weeks have meant everything to me. You have turned my quiet, predictable life into something extraordinary, and I do not want to go back to the way things were before you came along." "Neither do I," Willa admitted. "But I still do not have anything to offer you. No money, no property, no fancy skills." "You have yourself," Matthew said. "And that is all I want. But I understand if you need time, if you want to figure out who you are now that you are not running anymore." Willa thought about it for a moment, then shook her head. "I do not need time to know what I want. I want you, Matthew. I want this, whatever this is between us. I want to wake up every morning and see your face. I want to help you build that ranch you dream about. I want to put down roots and finally have a home." "Are you sure?" Matthew asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I have never been more sure of anything in my life," Willa said. Matthew kissed her then, deep and passionate, pouring all his feelings into that single gesture. When they finally came up for air, he rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me, Willa. Not right away if you are not ready, but someday. Tell me that someday you will be my wife." "Yes," Willa breathed. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married 2 months later, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Seligman. Willa wore a dress she had sewn herself, having discovered that while her regular stitching might not have been good enough for a seamstress shop, she could create beautiful garments when she put her mind to it. Sheriff Rodriguez gave her away, having become something of a father figure to her in the months since he had helped clear her name. After the wedding, Matthew carried Willa over the threshold of the house that was now officially theirs, both laughing as he nearly tripped on the front step. The house was small but comfortable, and Willa had spent the past weeks making it into a real home, with curtains on the windows and fresh flowers on the table, and the smell of her cooking filling the rooms. That night, as they lay together in the bedroom that had once been Matthew's alone, Willa traced the line of his jaw with her finger. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Taking such a big risk on someone you barely knew?" "Never," Matthew said firmly. "Not for a single second." "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Willa Lancaster." "Lancaster," Willa repeated, testing out her new name. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," Matthew said, pulling her closer. "Mrs. Wilhelmina Lancaster, it suits you." As the months passed, Willa and Matthew built a life together that exceeded both their expectations. Willa started taking in sewing work, creating dresses and shirts for the people of Seligman, and discovered that she had a real talent for it when she was not working under the pressure of a judgmental employer. Her reputation grew, and soon she had more orders than she could handle. Matthew continued to work at the stable, while saving every penny he could toward his dream of buying a ranch. Willa contributed her earnings to their savings, and they spent long evenings planning out what their ranch would look like, where they would build the house, how many cattle they would start with. A year after their wedding, they finally had enough saved to put a down payment on a piece of land just outside Seligman. It was exactly what Matthew had dreamed of, a valley with good grass and a creek running through it. They spent weekends clearing land and starting to build their house, working side by side in the Arizona sun. It was hard work, but Willa had never been happier. She loved the feel of accomplishment that came from seeing the house slowly take shape, from watching the first calves being born on their land, from planting a garden and watching it grow. But most of all, she loved the man working beside her, the man who had seen past her fear and her mistakes to the person she could become. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their newly completed house watching the sunset, Willa leaned her head on Matthew's shoulder. "Do you remember that day in the cellar when I said I would only disappoint you?" "I remember," Matthew said, wrapping his arm around her. "I was so wrong," Willa said. "I thought I had nothing to offer, that I would only drag you down, but look at what we have built together. Look at what we have become." "I knew you were wrong the moment you said it," Matthew replied. "I could see the strength in you, the determination. I just needed you to see it too." "You gave me that," Willa said, turning to look at him. "You gave me the chance to become more than I thought I could be." "We gave each other that," Matthew corrected. "You made me braver, more willing to fight for what I believed in. You taught me that sometimes the biggest risks bring the biggest rewards." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the sky turned from orange to pink to deep purple. Then Willa said, "I have something to tell you." "What is it?" Matthew asked, hearing something in her tone that made him sit up straighter. "I am with child," Willa said, both nervous and excited. "We are going to have a baby." Matthew stared at her for a moment as if he could not quite process what she had said. Then a huge grin spread across his face, and he swept her up in his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "We are going to be parents," he said, his voice full of wonder. "Willa, we are going to have a family. Are you happy?" She asked, though she could see the answer written all over his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Matthew said. "This is everything I have ever wanted. You, this ranch, and now a baby. I feel like the luckiest man in the world." 7 months later, on a cold January morning in 1884, Willa gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas, after Sheriff Rodriguez, who had become one of their dearest friends. The sheriff was touched beyond words when they told him, and he promised to always look out for his namesake. Motherhood came naturally to Willa, though she had worried it would not. She loved everything about Thomas, from his tiny fingers to his serious expression to the way he would calm down immediately when Matthew held him. Watching her husband with their son, seeing the gentleness and love in his every gesture, only made her fall more deeply in love with him. As Thomas grew from an infant to a toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. Matthew had a natural talent for breeding quality horses, and their stock became known throughout the territory. Willa's sewing business remained steady, though she cut back on her workload to spend more time with Thomas. When Thomas was 3 years old, Willa discovered she was pregnant again. This time, they were blessed with twins, a boy and a girl. They named the boy Samuel and the girl Rose, after Matthew's grandparents. The house suddenly felt much smaller and much louder, but neither of them would have changed it for the world. The years passed in a blur of children's laughter, hard work, and quiet moments of contentment. Thomas grew into a serious, responsible boy who loved helping his father with the horses. Samuel was the dreamer of the family, always coming up with elaborate stories and adventures. Rose was fearless and determined, refusing to be left behind when her brothers went exploring through it all. Willa and Matthew's love for each other only deepened. They weathered droughts and difficult winters, sick children and injured livestock, the normal challenges that came with ranching life. But they faced everything together, drawing strength from each other and from the family they had built. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Matthew took Willa on a ride to the spot where they had first decided to buy the ranch. The valley looked different now, with their house standing solid and strong, with corrals and barns and fenced pastures. It was everything they had dreamed of and more. "Do you remember when we stood here planning all this out?" Matthew asked, holding Willa's hand. "When it was just an empty valley and a dream." "I remember," Willa said. "I remember being so scared that I would mess it up somehow, that I would not be good enough to make this work." "And look at us now," Matthew said. 3 beautiful children, a thriving ranch, a life that most people would envy. You did not disappoint me, Willa. You exceeded every hope I ever had." "We did it together," Willa said. "I could never have become this person without you believing in me first." Matthew pulled her close, kissing her with all the passion and tenderness of that first kiss in the cellar so many years ago. "I love you, Wilhelmina Lancaster. I loved you when you were scared and wounded and hiding from the world. I loved you on our wedding day. I loved you when you gave me our children, and I will love you every day for the rest of my life." "I love you too," Willa said, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for taking that risk on me all those years ago. Thank you for seeing something in me that I could not see in myself." As they rode back to the house, where their children were waiting with a special dinner they had prepared with Sheriff Rodriguez's help, Willa thought about how different her life could have been. If Matthew had turned her away that day in Seligman, if he had not been willing to risk everything to help her, she might still be running. Or worse, She might have been caught by the Pike brothers and met a terrible end. Instead, she had found love, family, and a place to call home. She had gone from being a frightened fugitive to a respected member of the community, a wife, a mother, and a businesswoman. And it had all started with one man's willingness to look past her fear and see her potential. The years continued to roll by, bringing their share of joys and sorrows. Sheriff Rodriguez passed away when Thomas was 12, and the whole family mourned the loss of their dear friend. But his legacy lived on in the values he had taught them about justice, compassion, and standing up for what was right. Thomas eventually took over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch, proving to have inherited his father's skill with horses. Samuel became a teacher, opening a small school in Seligman, where he taught reading, writing, and arithmetic to the children of the growing town. Rose married a young rancher from a neighboring property and started her own family, though she remained fiercely independent and involved in running her husband's ranch alongside him. As Willa and Matthew grew older, their hair turning gray and their hands becoming rough and weathered from years of hard work, they spent more and more time simply sitting on their porch, watching their grandchildren play in the yard where their own children had played decades before. "Do you have any regrets?" Matthew asked one evening as they sat together, his arm around her shoulders just as it had been so many times before. Willa thought about it seriously, reviewing the long path her life had taken. "Only one," she finally said. Matthew looked at her in surprise. "What is it?" "I regret that I waited so long to find you," she said with a smile. "I wish I could have had even more years with you." Matthew laughed, the sound warm and rich. "Well, we are not done yet. I plan on sitting on this porch with you for at least another 20 years, watching our great-grandchildren run around." "That sounds perfect," Willa said, settling more comfortably against him. And as the sun set over their valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Willa reflected on how a single moment of kindness, one man's willingness to take a risk, had changed the entire trajectory of her life. She had been so certain that she had nothing to offer, that she would only bring disappointment and trouble. But Matthew had seen past all that to the woman she could become, and he had loved her into being her best self. Their story was not one of grand adventures or dramatic rescues, though it had started with both. It was a story of quiet, steady love, of two people building a life together one day at a time. It was a story of trust and forgiveness and second chances. And it was a story that proved that sometimes the biggest risks brought the greatest rewards. When Matthew finally passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Willa was beside him, holding his hand just as he had held hers through every challenge and triumph of their long marriage. She grieved deeply, but she also felt profound gratitude for the 56 years they had shared together, for the family they had created, for the life they had built. She lived for another 5 years after Matthew's death, surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. She spent her final years telling stories about their life together, about the cowboy who had taken a chance on a wounded fugitive and found his soulmate. On her last day, as she lay in bed with Rose holding one hand and Thomas holding the other, she smiled peacefully. "Do not be sad," she told them. "I had a wonderful life, far better than I ever dreamed possible, and soon I will be with your father again." When Wilhelmina Jenkins Lancaster closed her eyes for the final time, she did so knowing that she had been loved completely and had loved completely in return. She had proven wrong every doubt she had ever had about herself, had exceeded every limitation others had tried to place on her. And it had all begun with a simple choice, a cowboy's willingness to say yes when every practical instinct told him to say no. In the years that followed, The Lancaster ranch remained in the family, passed down through the generations. And with it came the story of Matthew and Willa, told and retold until it became the stuff of family legend. It became a reminder that love could bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, that second chances were real, and that sometimes the greatest risks brought the most beautiful rewards. The small cemetery outside Seligman held two graves side by side, marked with simple headstones that bore the names Matthew Lancaster and Wilhelmina Lancaster, along with the dates of their births and deaths. But more importantly, there was an inscription beneath their names that summed up their entire story in just a few words. She said she would only disappoint him eventually. The cowboy smiled and said, "I will take that risk gladly," and they lived happily ever after. Visitors to the cemetery would sometimes stop at those graves, reading the inscription and wondering about the story behind it. The older residents of Seligman were always happy to share the tale, embellishing it slightly with each telling, but always keeping the core truth intact. It was a story about love conquering fear, about believing in someone when they could not believe in themselves, about building something beautiful out of the ashes of disaster. And for the descendants of Matthew and Willa Lancaster, scattered now across Arizona and beyond, it was a reminder of where they came from and what they were capable of. They carried with them the legacy of two people who had refused to give up on each other or on their dreams, who had built a life and a family through sheer determination and unwavering love. The ranch itself continued to thrive, adapting with the times but maintaining the core values that Matthew and Willa had instilled. The horses bred there were still known for their quality and temperament. The land was still cared for with respect and attention. And the house, though expanded and modernized over the years, still had that original porch where Matthew and Willa had spent so many evenings watching the sunset. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right, those who lived there swore they could almost hear the echo of laughter, the murmur of two voices talking softly, the creak of rocking chairs on old wood. It was as if some part of Matthew and Willa remained, still keeping watch over the home they had built together, still present in the love that filled every corner of that place. Their story became more than just family history. It became a testament to the power of compassion, to the courage it takes to trust someone despite all the reasons not to the transformative nature of genuine love. It showed that people were not defined by their worst moments or their biggest mistakes, but by what they chose to do after those moments passed. For Willa, who had started life as the daughter of a drunk and a cheat, who had been forced to run for her life after defending herself from assault, the story could have ended in tragedy. But because one cowboy was willing to look beyond the surface and see the person underneath, because he was willing to take a risk when the safe choice would have been to turn away, her story became one of redemption and joy. And for Matthew, who might have lived his entire life alone, content with his horses and his work, but never experiencing the depth of connection that comes from truly sharing your life with another person, taking that risk brought him everything he had ever wanted. A partner, a family, a love that sustained him through every challenge and made every triumph sweeter. Their children grew old telling their children about the grandparents who had started with nothing and built an empire of love and family. They spoke of Willa's strength and resilience, of how she had overcome so much to become a pillar of the community. They told of Matthew's gentleness and integrity, of how he had stood up to bullies and protected the woman he loved at risk to his own life. But most importantly, they told the story of that moment in the cellar when Willa had tried to push Matthew away for his own good, when she had told him she would only disappoint him. They told how Matthew had smiled, completely undeterred, and said those words that would define their entire relationship. "I will take that risk gladly." Because in the end, that was what love was. It was a risk, a leap of faith into the unknown. It was choosing to believe in someone even when they could not believe in themselves. It was seeing potential where others saw only problems, seeing beauty where others saw only scars. It was saying yes when every logical reason said no, and then working together to prove that the illogical choice was actually the wisest one of all. The town of Seligman itself grew and changed over the decades, from a small desert outpost to a thriving community. But through all those changes, the Lancaster Ranch remained a constant, a reminder of the town's history and the enduring power of love and determination. People pointed it out to visitors, telling them about the family who had built it and the remarkable woman who had arrived in town wounded and scared, only to become one of its most beloved citizens. And sometimes, young couples facing their own challenges would make a pilgrimage to those two graves in the cemetery, reading the inscription and drawing strength from the story it told. They would stand there hand in hand, silently promising each other that they too would take the risk, that they would believe in each other even when it was hard, that they would build something lasting and beautiful together. The legacy of Matthew and Willa Lancaster lived on not just in their bloodline, but in the values they had exemplified. They had shown that where you started did not determine where you ended up, that past mistakes did not have to define your future, that love really could conquer all if both people were willing to fight for it. As the years turned into decades and then into a century, the story took on an almost mythical quality. But those who knew the family, who visited the ranch and saw the old photographs and read the journals that Willa had kept, knew that every word of it was true. The love between Matthew and Willa had been real and deep and transformative. It had created ripples that spread out through time, touching lives that neither of them could have imagined. And so their story remained, passed down through the generations, a testament to courage and compassion and the willingness to take risks for love. It was a story that began with a woman who thought she had nothing to offer and a man who saw everything she could become. It was a story that proved that sometimes the person who seems like the biggest risk turns out to be the safest bet of all. In the end, Willa had not disappointed Matthew. She had exceeded his every hope and dream, just as he had exceeded hers. Together, they had built not just a ranch or a family, but a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. And it all started because one cowboy was willing to smile and say 5 simple words that changed 2 lives forever. "I will take that risk gladly."